Hello everyone, welcome to Blazers Uprise. I'm Eric Brandt. This week's mailbag has a lot of great questions, so without wasting any of your time, let's get right into them. The first question is from Tyler Cornwall, who asks, who's been the biggest surprise in the first two games? It's been Winslow for me. He was an afterthought when we acquired him in a trade last year, and he's given us some meaningful minutes so far. I agree that Winslow has been a good player for us so far, but I'm not really surprised because he's not really doing anything out of his skill set that you would expect out of him. He's been very good in his role. Don't get me wrong. I'm just not super surprised about it because this is who he is when he's been given a chance. But yeah, he's not doing anything like hitting crazy amounts of threes or shooting the ball super well from outside. Those are things that would surprise me if he started doing things outside of his skill set. But so far, it's just stuff within his skill set, and his defense has been really good and game-changing at times for this team. So for me, the biggest surprise has actually been a negative one, and that's Anthony Simons shooting. And I think this will get better. I'm not worried about it or anything. I just don't believe that this is who he is as a shooter, and I think it will improve, and the team will be much better offensively once he does figure it out. But yeah, I'm kind of surprised to see Anthony Simons struggle on the offensive end. And in a pleasant way, I've been surprised at how well he's been doing on the defensive end. I think he's doing a really good job of navigating screens and playing off ball, not falling asleep, help defense. All that kind of stuff has been a positive for him this year. I think he's really grown on that end. And that's going to be the key to keeping him on the floor and making a Dame and Ant backcourt work. So I'm happy that he is playing well on that end. The next question comes from Hamish O'Donnell, who asks, how do you feel about our current defensive setup? I feel like there's been a few leaks in some plays with easy points given up. I agree that it has given up a lot of easy baskets, our defensive schemes and things like that. But I'm not as worried as I am the past couple years about it because I feel like despite giving up the easy baskets, they're trending in a positive direction to where they're trying to figure it out. They're making less of those mistakes than they have in previous years. And so I feel like it's trending in the positive direction. As far as the setup goes, I'm still not in love with having Jeremy Grant guard the other team's best guard ball handler, especially if that player like De'Aaron Fox or Chris Paul goes through a lot of pick and rolls. I don't think that's the best defensive strategy. I'd much rather utilize Jeremy Grant's strengths as a help defender for the guard who gets screened in those instead of trailing the play. But other than that, I do also feel like they run the zone too much. It's a good tool to use occasionally, but I don't think they should rely on it as much as they have been in the first few games. So those are the two main things. Just I put either Dame or Ant on the other team's best ball handler and allow your help defenders to do their job that way instead of taking one of your best defenders out of each play when he gets screened. And I'd use the zone defense a little less. And other than that, I think the easy baskets given up will sort itself out if they continue holding themselves accountable and working on rotations, closeouts, things like that. In terms of not falling asleep off ball, the problems have been much less than in years past. So happy about that progression. And yeah, I think all the other stuff will sort itself out as long as they continue to give effort on that end. Next up is Quincy Brew, who asks, do you think Watford could also play a Winslow-type role when he returns? He's a little bit different player than Winslow is, but I definitely think he could play a role. And, I mean, obviously I don't think he's as good defensively yet. Hopefully he does become that. He's a little bit like him on the offensive end in terms of hasn't really shown a consistent ability to knock down outside shots, although that's something he's worked really hard on over the past year, so maybe once he gets back in the lineup we will see that. But yeah, I think it's kind of similar, but I just don't think he's as physical on defense as Winslow is right now, or has the experience that Winslow has to know certain situations and awareness and things like that. So I think he definitely could evolve into that type of player. I just think that's a lot to ask of him to come in and do some of those same things as a second-year undrafted player. Chris S. asked, if Ant can become an above-average defender, how much does that shift this team's ceiling? In my mind, Ant is becoming that, and you can see already they're a top 10 defense. So I think that changes the ceiling a lot if this team has a top 10 defense. Now they have to figure out the other end too, the offensive end. But specifically to your question about defense, Ant, if we can rely on him to be on ball a little more and guard that player, like I mentioned earlier, that Grant's guarding right now, and have Grant do his job better as a help defender while Ant is getting through screens and staying in front of his man and not putting the rest of the defense in bad positions, that could potentially be a game changer. I don't know how realistic that is to have him be able to do that, because that's a tough ask for any player in the league, let alone someone who doesn't have the reputation yet for being good on that end. So yeah, it's obviously if Ant becomes a good defender and we have a starting lineup and multiple bench players that are all above average defenders, I think it makes up for the couple still that aren't. And I feel like this team has a huge ceiling if the defense is that good. Next up, we have Jetson, who asked, how do you think Eubanks has been so far, and how excited are you to get GP2 added to this roster? I think Eubanks has been okay. He hasn't been great, hasn't been bad, hasn't hurt us in the minutes he's played. He's come in and done his job. Now, I'm recording this before the Denver Nuggets game, so I don't know how both he and Jusuf Nurkic will do against Nikola Jokic, but that's going to be the issue all year. It's fine against some teams having Eubanks as the backup center, but how is it against the really good teams with a good center? We saw Ayton had a pretty good game against the Blazers. I don't think a lot of that was necessarily the center's fault, because we had a lot of situations where they got stuck in zone and had a smaller guy guarding Ayton, or the big had to come out on a pick and roll either with Booker or Chris Paul and was out of position to defend the rim then. So a lot of that isn't necessarily the center's fault, but I think that's going to be a theme all year, especially if we have games where Nurk gets in foul trouble or has to miss games due to injuries, how we deal with the center position, because Eubanks, I don't know if he's capable of doing that on like 30 minutes a game. So what are we going to do in those spots? So hopefully they can figure that out and Eubanks can step up, or hopefully we don't have that situation too often this year to worry about it. But that is definitely one of the things to keep an eye on the entire season. As for Gary Payton II, I'm really excited to get him back. Just see him be a menace on the defensive end. That's going to be fun to add it to a team that's already playing well defensively. We'll talk more later. I think there's another question about where he's going to get minutes, so I won't talk about that here. But yeah, Gary Payton is a fun player. He gets after it. He plays hard. Those type of players are always fun and can be difference makers for, at least on defense, with the energy and spark they provide. So yeah, I'm excited to see what we do with him, since we're doing well on that end without him. Next up is Pineapples, who asks, how do you think we match up and play against the Timberwolves? To me, they will be the best chance to see whether or not size is a big issue for us. I actually think we don't match up terribly against the Timberwolves. Karl-Anthony Towns isn't a guy who's going to kill our size with post-ups and things like that. So I think you can get away with putting Grant on him or Justice Winslow on him and just be physical and kind of push him out and just make sure you don't give him open three-point shots. And as for Gobert, I mean, he's just a guy who gets his buckets around the rim, whether that's lobs or offensive rebounds, things like that. So you just got to kind of keep guy on him at all times and make sure he's kept off the boards. So, I mean, obviously those guys are really good, and if they're playing on all cylinders, it's going to be a tough matchup for any team, really. But they haven't looked great so far. I think they're still trying to figure things out. So until they start clicking and playing well, I'm not too worried about them like I am compared to other teams, like Denver Nuggets with Jokic. I think that's a much tougher matchup for the Blazers. And also the Warriors, who always have trouble, teams that move the ball better. So if Minnesota gets to a point where they're moving the ball really well and teams are having trouble guarding multiple positions, I don't think their size is going to come into play until that happens as much as people would think it would be. But they're a really good team, and they're going to be tough for anyone if they start playing well. Eli Hanna asked, what was the last game you watched and enjoyed as much as Fridays against the Suns? Yeah, it was pretty enjoyable. I was yelling and going crazy, walking back and forth, standing up. Didn't have that last year, I don't feel like, outside of Keldon Blevins hitting a couple threes against the Lakers. That was pretty exciting, but overall, like, it didn't have the same intensity as a team you're hopeful for to be really good, because we're obviously not trying to be good last year. So it wasn't last year. The year before, I mean, the playoff series against Denver had some exciting moments despite the outcome, I guess. Dame scoring 55 in a playoff game was really enjoyable. Unfortunately, we lost that one, so can't really say it's that great. So probably going back to the bubble where, they beat the Lakers in game 1 of the playoffs, was probably the last truly enjoyable game like that one. Henry M is up next. How do you rate the coach so far this season, especially in regards to his game management, rotation, timeouts, etc.? Keep up the good work. Thank you, Henry. I think Chauncey's been doing a good job. I think for the first time you can see something building towards, a respectable unit on defense, and that's all you can ask for, is cutting down the mistakes, holding people accountable when they do make mistakes. And I think the rotations themselves have been fine. I think even though it's not a lot of top in depth, they are deep enough to where they can pull players who are not getting the job done on the floor. And I don't really think it matters who that player is if you're not getting it done, especially on the defensive end for most of the guys. If you're making mistakes on that end, I think there's someone there on the bench, especially once we get Gary Payton II back, that can do that job. So for the first time, I think he's got the pieces to both implement his schemes and also implement full accountability to where you have options to go to if the players aren't doing their job. So I like his rotation so far. I think they're fine. Be interesting to see once we get a full complement of players how those rotations work out. I do like that with Sharpe, he has earned minutes and is playing a little bit in each game. So you like to see that. And then I also like their approach with Nasir Little. He signed a long-term extension. So they're kind of taking that long-term approach with him and not kind of forcing him in when he's not ready to be contributing right now. And I think he's responded the last couple games with very good outings now that the pressure's kind of off him a little bit. And he's just going out there and playing basketball. So I think they're handling that situation well. Just let him grow and develop at his own pace. And if he proves he can get more minutes, give him more minutes. But until then, I think what they're doing with him is fine. In terms of game management, I think it's been pretty good outside of the end of the Phoenix Suns game. At the end of the fourth quarter with 7 seconds left, I don't think that's a situation you want to not call a timeout in. I am fine with not calling timeout in certain situations, but usually that's with 15 seconds or so to go where you have enough time to dribble up the floor and set something up, or for a player to ISO. In that situation, it was more just dribble up the court and take a shot and hope it goes in. I don't like not calling a timeout in those situations. And then at the end of overtime, when DeAndre Ayton was fouled with 1.2 seconds left, to use the challenge, which also used our last time out, I thought was a mistake, because if he made both and tied the game with 1.2 seconds, you could call a timeout and advance the ball and still get a good shot off with how many good shooters we have on this team. So I would have liked to have seen him not challenge that. I understand if you challenge and you win that challenge, you probably win the game because they don't get a shot off or whatever, and there's a jump ball most likely. So I get it why he challenged. I just didn't like the use of both not using a timeout in the first situation and then using it poorly in the second situation. But we have to also remember Chauncey's the second year now. The first year, he didn't really have a lot of close game situations to learn game management, so hopefully he learns from those mistakes. And I think he'll be fine. And in terms of the rest of the stuff, I've liked the defensive scheme so far. I've liked most of the movement off ball on offense. I think we're doing a good job with that. And I think it's fine. I think he's doing a good job so far. Jury's still out though. I mean, it's still a small sample size, so hopefully he can keep this together. We saw some good moments at the beginning of last year before things fell apart, so hopefully that's not, or this year isn't a fluke like last year at times. So, I think it's good that we're getting wins in these close games too, because that shows the players that they both have improvement to get even better, but the stuff they're doing already is paying off. So I really like Billups' temperament this year. All right, Michael Kroll asks, who is your ideal backup five that would fit Chauncey's system that could be gettable by the deadline? I think a lot of this still needs to play out. You know, what teams will end up being sellers, what teams will be buyers. If there's some surprise teams that don't end up trading players that you think are available, or some teams that do poorly and end up trading everyone. So gettable players, I don't think there's a huge list right now. After December 15th, when a lot of the offseason acquisitions can be tradable, I think that becomes a little easier to answer. But since you asked the question, I'll just throw out a name. Daniel Gafford of the Washington Wizards is a big man who has a lot of things he does okay. He's not great at anything, but like he's a decent enough passer as a big man, can score a little bit, is okay defensively. He signed an extension a couple years ago, but it hasn't kicked in yet, so he's still on a contract that's a little under $2 million, so maybe you could work in that cheap contract this year, stay under the luxury tax somehow with the pieces you give up for him, and then also you have him for a few years after that. His salary goes up to around $10 million next year, but that would be a future problem to have. So maybe like a big like that could, if the Wizards don't do well, could be gettable. But yeah, other than that, it's hard to really know this early in the season what kind of big men will be tradable or gettable. Isaac Sandstrom asked, hypothetically, if the Blazers could sign someone for free and they didn't play, but they'd only be there for the locker room presence, who would you sign? Honestly, I think the locker room is really good this year. I think we have a lot of guys who are really good locker room presences, so I don't think we really need someone, even if it was free, to sign. So I'd rather answer that question like, who would you sign for free if it didn't affect the luxury tax, and that would be someone like a DeMarcus Cousins or just someone who would give us a little more backup depth. But in terms of locker room presence, I think we're okay in that area, so I wouldn't really think we need to sign someone for free. Cody Rothwell is up next. He asked, the Nuggets have been a constant headache for the Blazers over the last 3 years. How do we consistently gain the edge over this young performing team in the now and in the near future? To me, when you talk about the Nuggets, it starts and ends with Jokic. So how do you defend him? How do you limit his impact on the game? Back-to-back MVP, so that's a difficult thing for just about any team to do. So first and foremost, Jusuf Nurkic, when we play the Denver Nuggets, has to stay on the court, can't commit silly fouls, and has to be able to be out there and defend him. But Denver's a tough team. I think I predicted them to be number one in the West, so I obviously think very highly of them. But I think they're a team, despite getting a couple of really good defenders in KCP and Bruce Brown this offseason, I think you can exploit some mismatches with Michael Porter Jr. and Jamal Murray. So I think we should still have a good opportunity to score on them. And then we also should just be better defensively than we've been in years past. So those things I think will help balance it out. But overall, I think they're a better team than the Blazers. So I think they're going to continue to be a headache unless we have really magical performances like we did with Damian Lillard. But we still lost that game. So when he scored 55 points in the playoffs. So even those kind of magical performances aren't necessarily giving us wins in those games. So yeah, just tough matchup for any team. Just got to hope they don't really figure it out, I guess, and just got to be disruptive and do some things differently that they haven't seen schematic wise. And I think they'll be fine this year against Denver. But certainly has been a fun rivalry over the past few years with a couple of playoff matchups, and obviously being in the same division, play them 4 times a year. Nuggets, Blazers, I think isn't going anywhere. I don't think the Nuggets are going anywhere as long as they have Jokic. They're a good team. He's proven the last couple of years that he can carry a team no matter who he has around him. Just tough matchup for anyone. Pasty Zach asks, in the 2-3 zone, why are the Blazers putting one or sometimes both forwards at the top of the zone? The idea there is to be disruptive at the top. So if you put length or some of your bigger players up there, they theoretically can disrupt the play and be a nuisance on smaller guards who are bringing the ball up. The problem is with the Blazers, if you have your 2 guards on the bottom of the zone on the sides, then they're stuck often in help positions that are against much bigger players. So if you don't succeed at the top with the pressure, then the backside of your zone has a lot more problems. So I get why they are doing it. A lot of teams have had success with putting a disruptor at the top of the zone. The best example for that is the way the Cleveland Cavaliers use Evan Mobley up there. So I get the theory behind it. I just think, one, I don't think the Blazers should be running zone as much as they do. And 2, I think they have to figure out how to make it work with the guards up top so they're not put in a bad position to be help defenders. And you're putting guys like Hart, Winslow, and Grant, who are good help defenders, in those positions, and I think it utilizes everything else. But I get the idea that you want to be, pressuring the ball up top, and you can do that better with longer, more athletic, rangier players. So that's kind of why they do it. I just think, as of right now, the Blazers need to figure out how to be good without that step, and then add that step later as the defense starts to get better. Or maybe sometimes you run it that way, sometimes you run it the other way. Just be less predictable than in years past. And I think they will figure it out. But right now, that's why they do it. I don't necessarily think it's the best option for them at the moment. But so far, it's hard to argue with the results being the top 10 defense. Next up, we have Sam Dooley. If Sharpe continues to show flashes, would Billups be justified in putting him in a starting role? If not, when do you predict Sharpe gaining the starting role? I just want to see more Shaedon Sharpe, and I'm wondering when that will happen. If he's playing this well right off the bat as a pro, after sitting out last year. I mean, the sky's the limit for this kid. But let's pump the brakes a little bit on, being a starter, things like that. Yes, those will all come if he develops. I don't think Billups would be justified putting him in the starting lineup because Hart's playing really well at the 3. I believe Ant will figure it out and be fine. I don't think you want to mess with that right away either. I don't think Sharpe has done enough to warrant that either. Very, very exciting for the future of Shaedon Sharpe, don't get me wrong. But his starting role, things like that, will come in future seasons when he has a little bit more experience and a little more understanding of the game as a whole. But man, you see the flashes, and this guy is going to be special, I think. And the Blazers got a good one in him. It's going to make the tanking season pay off. I agree. I want to see more of him. But I am happy at the same time that Chauncey hasn't been afraid to play him. Keep in mind, Kobe Bryant averaged 15 minutes a game his rookie season. So I think if you use that as a template for Sharpe, I don't think you can really expect to get more than that. Hopefully we start blowing a few teams out so that he can play a little bit more in the fourth quarter or whatever. But we did hear Chauncey Billups say that if he's playing well, he wouldn't be afraid to put him in crunch time. So maybe towards the end of the season, that would be more realistic to me than seeing him start necessarily, unless there's injuries, is him just gaining a few more minutes as the season goes on, to where instead of 15 minutes a game, maybe he's getting 20 minutes a game, and some of those minutes are left in longer in the fourth quarter towards the end of the game, and he's having an impact. So I think that's the most realistic thing to expect from him. Sorry to be a bummer there, but I just don't see him starting this year. The final question of this mailbag is from P-Town Made. When GP2 comes back, how many minutes do you give him right away? I think that's going to be dependent on how well the team is doing when he comes back. I feel like they're in a situation where they can afford to bring him back as slow as he needs to be. Maybe just ramp it up with a few minutes starting out and then work his way up to a bigger role. But this is a guy who's going to come in and play hard no matter what his situation is, no matter how many minutes he's given. And I'm excited to have that option back. Just having another presence on defense will definitely take this team to maybe even another level than they're performing at already. And I think in terms of minutes, I don't think it's going to take anyone's spot right now, because I don't think anyone deserves to have their spot taken. So I think he's just going to help keep some of the starters' minutes down. So you take, a couple minutes from Grant, a couple minutes from Hart, a couple minutes from Ant, and maybe you can get away with playing Dame a minute or two less. And all of a sudden you have, a situation where he's playing 10 minutes or so right when he comes back, and then you ramp it up from there. And I think then you can start that accountability thing. So who's ever performing between, or the best between Peyton, Sharpe, Nas, Winslow, those type of players, it can just be like a game feel on who has it that night, who doesn't, who's providing the most effort, who's playing the best defensively, what the best matchups are. So I don't think you necessarily have to pigeonhole it into like one certain, like he has to play this many minutes or whatever. And I really like having teams with those kind of options versus some of the like set rotations of the past where, this person's going to come in at this point of this quarter and he's going to play until this point of the next quarter or whatever. Like, I don't really like dictating a game before it's even started. So I think that's going to be a fun thing for Billups. If everyone's playing well, I'd hate to be the one that has to decide those rotations. I think Billups has a tough job there, but I think any coach would tell you they'd rather have those decisions than not have enough options to play. So I think they'll be fine. I think GP2 will come in and play a small role at first, and I expect it to grow as the season goes on. But I also expect maybe Watford to get a chance too at some point. I think he's probably earned that in Billups' eye. And so I don't know if that'll come at the expense of Eubanks at center or what they'll do there. But yeah, there's a lot of players that will factor into the rotation. We have a lot of good ones. Something the Warriors have done in years past is kind of like choose certain weeks or whatever where this player is going to have this role for this week, and then next week there's a different player in that role. And early in the season, I think you can get away with that, so not worried about it right now. But it'll be interesting when the playoffs or when the end of the season comes, and if the Blazers are fighting for a playoff spot or seeding or whatever it is, it'll be really interesting to see how that rotation gets shortened. Great questions again for the mailbag this week. Look for the prompt on the community tab on Blazers Uprise for future mailbags if you want to leave a question. If you left one this time and I did not get to it, it's because I pulled all the questions before I recorded this, so you probably left it after I had already pulled the comments, so just leave your question on the next prompt. But thank you so much for watching. Appreciate each and every one of you. Hope you have a good rest of your day, and until next time, as always, peace out. Go Blazers.